Hi, I am Amara Khan, and I've been working on a story for quite some time now. All of 2019, I've been working on this story. It's a really important issue to me as I am Pakistani and my family is from Pakistan. I am currently born and raised here in Calgary, Canada. I'm studying at Mount Royal University. I'm a journalism student, and I'm currently in my final year. This issue that I'm about to discuss is a very important issue to me as it's a South Asian issue. It's about Kashmir. So I interviewed quite a few individuals. So I just want to I tried really hard to get this article published, but due to the coronavirus, I wasn't able to. So I'm just going to read the article out loud. The first individual I interviewed was a Canadian Pakistani journalist. He is the chief bureau of Such TV Canada. And it's a television network designed for Pakistani Canadians. He is a journalist himself, and his family is from Azad Kashmir. So they live in Kashmir, which lies between India and Pakistan. For the past 6 decades, India and Pakistan have been fighting over Kashmir. As the conflict escalated in the past few months, India imposed strict censorship on the news media and the internet. This is a quote from him. "Imagine in Stone Age times, people are riding on animals, taking the mail from one place to another place. It's not even like that. It's not even like Stone Age times. The people in Jammu and Kashmir are even behind those in Stone Age," said Hussain. So the Sadduk Hussain is. Pakistan does not allow, so also Pakistan has some censorship issues in Azad Kashmir. So it's, I'm just going to go over a little bit of that. Pakistan does not allow media to criticize Pakistan's accession to Kashmir. Everything in media must be overlooked by the government of Pakistan's Kashmir Council and the Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. Pakistan administered Kashmir, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, practices self-censorship to avoid harassment by state authorities. As the media is dependent on official advertisements for revenue, authorities have allegedly discontinued advertisements when media organizations were deemed too critical. The Sadduk Hussain lives in Okotoks. However, his relatives are currently living in Azad Kashmir. As a journalist, it's his responsibility to inform the general public, but due to media censorship in Pakistan, he is not allowed to. Kashmir, which sits between India and Pakistan, has been fighting to be an independent state since 1948. This region has been forced to split into 3 parts. One part of it is occupied by Pakistan, which is called Azad Jammu and Kashmir. This area comprises Azad Jammu Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. The other part is known as Indian-administered Kashmir, which is more commonly known as Jammu and Kashmir, which consists of Kashmir Valley and Jammu and Ladakh regions. There is a small portion of Ladakh that belongs to China, which is called Aksai Chin. So the Indian government decided to give this small region to China for negotiation reasons. As the conflict escalated, India repealed Kashmir's special status on August 6, 2019, and increased Indian military presence and deprived Kashmiris of certain human rights such as freedom of association. This has led many Kashmiris in Calgary worried about the well-being of their family and friends back home. Prior to 1947, under British rule, the Jammu and Kashmir region was one of the largest states in the Indian subcontinent. But the Independence Act of 1947 stated the right to remain independent or accede to either two new fully sovereign nations, India or Pakistan. At the time, Hari Singh was the ruler of Muslim majority population of Jammu and Kashmir. Singh at the time wanted to remain independent. But on October 26, 1947, he signed the Instrument of Accession to India because of Pashtun forces invading the area. An armed conflict involving India and Pakistani forces followed shortly after. This led India to talk to United Nations Security Council on January 1st, 1948. 2 weeks later, Pakistan had also raised its concerns on the same matter. On 20th January 1948, the Security Council established the United Nations Commission for India and the Pakistan UNCIP to help mediate the dispute. On April 21st, 1948, the UN Security Council tried to facilitate a free and impartial plebiscite to decide whether the state of Jammu and Kashmir is to accede to India or Pakistan. Resolution 47, which was created by the Security Council, requested that the government of Pakistan should withdraw tribesmen and Pakistani fighters from the state of Jammu and Kashmir and prevent any intrusions into the state or aid those fighting. The plebiscite was to take place after the implementation of various measures foreseen in Resolution 47. The plebiscite never took place as both nations continued to fight each other. So another individual I interviewed was Samina Ashraf Bajwa. She is the chair of Canadian Muslims for Peace and Justice. This is her quote: "There was supposed to be a referendum, an election. Unfortunately, 70 years down the line, that never happened." So basically, a plebiscite was supposed to happen where Kashmir was given the option to either stay with India or to stay with Pakistan. But because of the ongoing conflict between India and Pakistan, that plebiscite never took place. What is happening now? So I'm going to talk about the current news on Jammu and Kashmir. Article 370 of the Indian Constitution gives the Jammu and Kashmir residents autonomous status. But on October 31st, 2019, it was removed by Home Minister Amit Shah with the consent of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Damodaras Modi. This law made sure there was no interference by the central government of India, meaning anyone who wasn't a resident of Kashmir couldn't buy their land. Now that the article law has been removed, this allows the people living outside of Jammu and Kashmir, Indian-occupied Kashmir, the right to have permanent residence and to buy properties there. This has led to the removal of the autonomous status and increased military presence in Kashmir Valley. According to Tasadduq Hussain, this removal of the article is forcing Jammu and Kashmir to join India, which is true because the special status that Jammu and Kashmir was given, which was Article 370, was to give them the right to their own land. Now that that has been removed, that law, anyone can go into Jammu and Kashmir and buy the land. Najib Butt, president of the Canadian chapter of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz Opposition Party, he currently resides in Calgary, Alberta, but explains that media should also be allowed to operate freely in Jammu and Kashmir. Media should be allowed to move freely down the Kashmir Valley and be able to see the difference between Pakistan-administered Kashmir and Indian-administered Kashmir. That is a quote he said himself, that media should be allowed to see both regions and make their judgments. He explains that he does support Kashmiri's right to expression. Samina Ashraf Bajwa, a Calgary family doctor, sees the situation somewhat differently. Bajwa explains there are tensions among Kashmiris and Pakistanis, and there is an unfinished business because Azad Kashmir is independently operated, but they also have a lot of ties with Pakistan. They even use Pakistani passports because they don't have their own. Bajwa is the chair of Canadian Muslims for Peace and Justice. This organization helps Canadian Muslims and works in collaboration with the University of Calgary. Kishan Sharma has a different view of the dispute. He grew up and worked in India as a teacher. He is now retired and lives in Calgary with his family. He can recall when India and Pakistan partitioned in 1947. He and his family had been living in a Muslim area of India, which eventually became Pakistan. But they were Hindus and they wanted to remain in India because the majority population was Hindu. Sharma had witnessed firsthand the conflict of India and Pakistan at the age of 15. He says that the cause of these conflicts isn't necessarily based on religious differences, but more on political differences. At the time, Kashmir was caught in the middle as the majority population in Kashmir was Muslim. Sharma explains that the removal of Article 370 is giving those residency who weren't given the right previously. Tasadduq Hussain, the journalist who reports from Canada for Such TV, a news channel in Pakistan, says, "We are all human. We all deserve to talk on these issues. It's not just a Muslim issue or a Kashmir issue. It's a humanity issue." Hussain does the best he can by putting out the latest news on Kashmir through Facebook. For the last 4 years, I have been trying the best that I can to make people realize this is a burning issue and it needs to be resolved. At the end of my article that I just read out to you, this is a report I got from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. So it's right here. And it's an update of the situation of human rights in Indian-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir from May 2018 to April 2019. So this is the UN requesting, they have some concerns that they want to request from India and Pakistan. So I'm just going to read it to you. This report highlights serious human rights violations and patterns of impunity in Indian-administered Kashmir and significant human rights concerns witnessed in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. As stated in this Human Rights Commission of June 2018 report, there remains an urgent need to address past and ongoing human rights violations to deliver justice for all people in Kashmir. Political tensions between India and Pakistan over Kashmir often result in the increase of ceasefire violations along the line of control, including shelling and firing, ceasefire infringements in 2019 and 2018, resulted in the killing of civilians, destruction of civilian property, and displacement of people in both Indian-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, as neither the governments of India nor of Pakistan have taken clear steps to address and implement the recommendations made in the Human Rights Commissioner June 2018 report. Those recommendations are reiterated and reinstated in this report. Additional recommendations are also addressed to the respective authorities for their consideration. To the Human Rights Council, consider the findings of this report, including the possible establishment of a commission of inquiry to conduct a comprehensive, independent international investigation into allegations of human rights violation in Kashmir. To the authorities of India, fully respect India's international human rights law obligations in Indian administered Kashmir. Urgently repeal the Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act made in 1990. The Special Powers Act is an act where military presence is allowed in India, Jammu and Kashmir, and they're allowed to use excessive force with civilians. And in the meantime, immediately remove the requirement for prior central government permission to prosecute security forces personnel accused of human rights violations in civilian courts. So what UN is asking is that they want all the soldiers who have done excessive force to civilians to be prosecuted, and there should be some court proceedings for those civilians. Establish independent, impartial, and credible investigation to probe all civilian killings which have occurred since July 2016, as well as obstruction of medical services during the 2016 unrest, arson attacks against schools, and incidents of excessive use of force by security forces, including serious injuries caused by the use of pellet firing shotguns. So UN in the 2018 report requested India to stop using pellet firing shotguns. And India's response was that that's the only weapon that they have, and they were shooting peaceful protesters. So that was quite an issue, and that was a human right violation. So they are still requesting that please get rid of these pellet firing shotguns. Investigate all deaths that have occurred in the context of security operations in Jammu and Kashmir following the guidelines laid down by Supreme Court of India. Investigate all cases of abuse committed by armed groups in Jammu and Kashmir, including the killings of minority Kashmiri Hindus since the late 1980s. Provide reparations and rehabilitation to all individuals injured and the family of those killed in the context of security operations. Investigate and prosecute all cases of sexual violence allegedly perpetrated by state and non-state actors, and provide reparations to all victims. Bring into compliance with international human rights standards all Indian laws and standard operating procedures relating to the use of force by law enforcement and security entities, particularly the use of firearms. Immediately order the end of the use of pellet firing shotguns in Jammu and Kashmir for the purpose of crowd control. Amend the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act 1978 to ensure its compliance with international human rights law. Release, or if appropriate, charge under applicable criminal offenses all those held under administrative detention, and ensure the fully respect of standards of due process and fair trial guaranteed under international law. Treat any person below the age of 18 who is arrested in a manner consistent with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So any individual, because one of their human right violations is that they also attack teenagers, even children. So any individual who is under the age 18 shouldn't be detained and should be let go. End restrictions on the movement of journalists and arbitrary arbitrary bans of the publication of newspapers in Jammu and Kashmir. So journalists are not allowed to go into Jammu and Kashmir. So this is a request that allow freedom of the press. Ensure independent, impartial, and credible investigations into all unmarked graves in the state of Jammu and Kashmir as directed by the States of Human Rights Commission. If necessary, seek assistance from the Government of India or the International Committee. Expand the competence of Jammu and Kashmir State Human Rights Commission to investigate all human right violations and abuses in the state, including those allegedly committed by security forces, so the military presence. So just to go into all of the human right violations to civilians and investigate all those issues. Ensure people from Kashmir are not attacked or legally harassed in other parts of India on the basis of their actual or presumed identity. Ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All People from Enforced Disappearance. So there are some school children who have disappeared and nobody knows where they've gone. There's also a lot of people who've been detained and they've been put into secret concentration camps and nobody knows where they are. So only the government of India knows where they are. So that's what this is addressing. The Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment and its optional protocol. Introduce enabling domestic laws as recommended during India's UPR in 2008, 2012, and 2017. In the line with its standing invitation to the special procedures, accept the invitation requests of the almost 20 mandates that have such requests. In particular, accept the request of the Working Group on Informed or Involuntary Disappearances and facilitates its visits to Jammu and Kashmir, and fully respect the right to self-determination of the people of Kashmir as protected under international law. So this is all addressed to India and Jammu and Kashmir and mostly to the government of India. Now I'm going to read to you the section that's just addressed to the government of Pakistan. And I'll send you a screenshot, but it's literally just this much. And this whole address to the government of India was a whole page. So that's how many violations they have been doing to Jammu and Kashmir. So to the government of Pakistan, fully respect international human rights law obligations in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. End the misuse of anti-terror legislation to persecute those engaging in peaceful political and civil activities and expressions of dissent, and amend the Anti-Terrorism Act to bring it in line with international human rights standards, including by incorporating human rights safeguards. Federal and local authorities should amend sections of the interim constitution of Azad Kashmir and other relevant legislation that limits the right to freedoms of expression and opinion. So it's more of an expression and opinion type of censorship in Azad Kashmir. It's not really, like, they're not killing anyone. It's more of association, freedom of press, freedom of association type issues in Azad Kashmir. Immediately release from prison or house arrest any political activists, journalists, and other civil society actors who have been convicted. So in Azad Kashmir, it's more of a freedom of the press issue. They detain journalists, political leaders, anyone who is bashing Pakistan or Azad Kashmir. So that's what this is talking about. So the federal and local authorities should amend the constitutions of Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit Baltistan to end the criminalization of Ahmadiyya Muslims. So there is a bit of discrimination on Ahmadiyya Muslims. In my own opinion, I feel that Kashmir, if we were living in a perfect world, Kashmir as its own independent state would be the best option, where it's not tied to Pakistan, it's not tied to India, it's its own independent state. That's my personal opinion that way. That's just my own thoughts.